What if the person you trusted most with your heart was secretly planning to steal everything you've built? What if your blindness wasn't just a disability, but the very thing that made you vulnerable to the most dangerous betrayal of all? This is the shocking, true story of Marcus Wellington, a self-made millionaire who lost his sight in a tragic accident, but never lost his ability to see people's true intentions. Until he met Dr. Elena Vasquez. She promised him the one thing money couldn't buy, his vision back. But behind her beautiful lies was a plan so twisted, so carefully orchestrated, that it would shake the very foundation of trust itself. In a world where love and greed collide, where medical miracles hide deadly secrets, and where a blind man must learn to see the truth before it destroys everything he holds dear, this story will leave you questioning everyone around you. Because sometimes, the people closest to us are the ones we should fear the most. Get ready for a journey into deception, betrayal, and the ultimate fight for survival, where sight isn't just about seeing with your eyes, but seeing with your heart. Marcus Wellington had always believed that success was about seeing opportunities others couldn't. The irony wasn't lost on him now, sitting in his penthouse office 30 floors above Manhattan, completely blind, yet running a multi-million-dollar empire with the precision of a master chess player. 3 years had passed since the accident that stole his sight but couldn't touch his ambition. The explosion at his chemical plant had taken more than just his vision. It had taken his naive trust in people, his casual approach to relationships, and his belief that good intentions were enough in business. What it had given him in return was something far more valuable: the ability to hear lies in people's voices, to sense deception in their breathing patterns, and to feel the true weight of their words. His fingers traced the raised dots of the Braille report his assistant had prepared. Wellington Industries had just closed another major deal, bringing his net worth well past the 50 million mark. Not bad for a man who couldn't see the contracts he was signing. His other senses had sharpened to an almost supernatural degree. He could identify his employees by their footsteps, detect nervousness in the slightest change of vocal pitch, and sense attraction or hostility from across a room. The intercom buzzed, interrupting his thoughts. "Mr. Wellington," came the crisp voice of his assistant, Sarah. "Dr. Elena Vasquez is here for your appointment." Marcus straightened his tie and ran his hand through his still thick, dark hair. At 35, he maintained the same commanding presence that had built his fortune, even if he now navigated the world through sound and touch rather than sight. He had been researching experimental eye treatments for months, consulting with specialists around the world. Most had been honest about the limitations of current technology. A few had been quietly optimistic. But Dr. Vasquez had been different during their phone consultation last week. She had been confident, almost excited about his case. "Send her in," he said, rising from behind his mahogany desk and moving with practiced ease toward the sitting area where he preferred to conduct personal meetings. The door opened, and Marcus immediately noticed several things about his visitor. Her heels clicked against the hardwood floor with a confident rhythm. Expensive shoes, probably Italian leather. Her breathing was calm and controlled, suggesting either genuine confidence or excellent self-control. Most interestingly, she wore a subtle perfume that managed to be both professional and alluring, jasmine with hints of vanilla, and something slightly medicinal that suggested she had come directly from a clinical environment. "Dr. Vasquez," Marcus said, extending his hand in her general direction. "Thank you for making time to see me." Her hand was soft but firm when it met his, with long fingers that felt steady and precise. Surgeon's hands. "The pleasure is mine, Mr. Wellington. I've been following your company's work in biochemical research. Your innovations in molecular synthesis are quite impressive, especially considering the challenges you've overcome." Marcus gestured toward the leather chairs arranged near the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a spectacular view of Central Park, a view he could no longer enjoy but kept anyway because he remembered how beautiful it was. "Please have a seat. Can I offer you anything? Coffee? Water?" "Coffee would be wonderful, thank you." As Marcus pressed the intercom button to request refreshments, he analyzed what he had learned so far. Elena Vasquez spoke with a slight accent that suggested Spanish as a first language, but her English was flawless and precise. Her voice carried the kind of authority that came from years of medical training and successful practice. More intriguingly, there was something else in her tone, a warmth that seemed genuine, but also carefully controlled, as if she were revealing just enough personality to be engaging without crossing professional boundaries.
"I understand you specialize in retinal reconstruction and optic nerve regeneration,"
Marcus said as he settled into his chair, Your research paper on bioengineered corneal implants was fascinating, though I'll admit I had to have it read to me.
Elena laughed softly, and the sound sent an unexpected flutter through Marcus's chest.
It had been a long time since a woman's laugh had affected him that way. Since the accident, he had been cautious about romantic entanglements, partly because of the practical challenges of his condition, and partly because he had grown suspicious of people's motives. A blind millionaire was an attractive target for all kinds of manipulation. Thank you. That research is actually directly relevant to your case. The explosion damage you described involves multiple layers of trauma: corneal scarring, lens displacement, retinal detachment, and what I suspect is significant optic nerve inflammation rather than complete severing. Sarah arrived with coffee, and Marcus noted how Elena thanked her warmly but without the excessive friendliness that often indicated someone trying too hard to make a good impression. When they were alone again, Elena continued her explanation. Most doctors have probably told you that your condition is permanent because they're looking at it as separate injuries requiring individual treatment. I see it differently. I see it as a complex system that needs to be rebuilt as a whole. Marcus leaned forward slightly, his interest genuinely piqued. Explain what you mean. Traditional approaches try to repair each damaged component separately. Replace the lens, patch the retina, clear the cornea. It's like trying to fix a broken watch by working on one gear at a time. What I'm proposing is more like building an entirely new timepiece using the salvageable parts of the old one. The metaphor was compelling, but Marcus had learned to be wary of doctors who made complex procedures sound simple. And you believe this approach would work in my case? Elena set down her coffee cup, and Marcus heard her lean forward in her chair. When she spoke again, her voice carried an intensity that made his pulse quicken. Wellington, I don't just believe it would work. I know it would. I've been developing a revolutionary technique that combines bioengineered tissue grafts with stem cell therapy and targeted neural regeneration. The procedure involves creating a completely new optical pathway while preserving your existing neural connections. How many times have you performed this procedure? There was a brief pause before Elena answered, so brief that most people wouldn't have noticed it. But Marcus's heightened senses caught the slight hesitation, the almost imperceptible intake of breath that suggested carefully chosen words to come. You would be among the first patients to receive the full treatment protocol. However, I've successfully tested individual components of the procedure, and the results have been remarkable. More importantly, your case presents the ideal conditions for success. The explosion damage, while extensive, was relatively clean. There's no evidence of progressive degenerative disease, no genetic factors that would complicate healing, and your overall health is excellent. Marcus sat back, processing this information. Being among the first patients for an experimental procedure carried obvious risks, but it also represented his best chance at regaining his sight. He had built his fortune by taking calculated risks that others were afraid to take. What would be involved in this procedure? Elena's enthusiasm became more apparent as she described her proposed treatment. It would be a series of 3 surgical procedures spaced about 6 weeks apart. The first surgery would involve clearing the damaged tissue and preparing the optical pathway. The second would implant the bioengineered components and begin the stem cell therapy. The third would fine-tune the neural connections and complete the integration process. And the recovery time? Full recovery and vision restoration would take approximately 4 to 6 months from the first procedure. During that time, you would experience gradual improvement, starting with basic light perception and progressing to full visual acuity. Marcus found himself genuinely excited for the first time in months. The possibility of seeing again, of regaining that crucial sense that had defined so much of his life, was intoxicating. But his business instincts warned him to ask the practical questions. Dr. Vasquez, I appreciate your confidence in this procedure, but I need to understand the risks and the costs.
Of course. Annabella, fair.
The risks are significant but manageable. There's approximately a 15% chance that the procedure could fail completely, leaving you no worse than you are now. There's a smaller chance, perhaps 5%, that complications could arise that might affect your other senses or cognitive function. However, I believe the potential benefits far outweigh these risks. And the financial investment? Elena named a figure that made Marcus pause. It was substantial, not enough to seriously impact his wealth, but certainly enough to represent a major financial commitment. More importantly, it was exactly the kind of sum that would make him attractive to someone with dishonest intentions. That's a significant investment, he said carefully. Revolutionary medical procedures require substantial resources, Elena replied smoothly. The bioengineered materials alone cost more than most people's annual salaries. Plus, there are facility costs, specialized equipment, post-operative care, and my team of specialists. I understand it's a large sum, but consider what you're purchasing. Not just your sight, but your independence, your ability to fully engage with the world again. Marcus realized that Elena was not just a skilled surgeon, but also an excellent salesperson. She had managed to make the costs seem not just reasonable, but essential. Still, something about her presentation bothered him. It was almost too perfect, too precisely calibrated to address his concerns and appeal to his desires. "I'd like to think about this decision carefully," he said. "Perhaps we could meet again next week to discuss the details further?" "Absolutely. In fact, I'd be happy to provide you with more detailed information about the procedure, including technical specifications and projected timelines. I could also arrange for you to speak with some of my colleagues who have been involved in developing this technique." As Elena gathered her things to leave, Marcus found himself drawn to her in ways that went beyond the medical procedure she was offering. There was something magnetic about her presence, something that made him want to trust her completely. That impulse worried him almost as much as it attracted him. "Dr. Vasquez," he said as she reached the door, "may I ask you a personal question?" "Of course." "Why is helping me regain my sight so important to you? I mean beyond the professional satisfaction and financial compensation." Elena paused, her hand on the door handle. When she spoke, her voice carried a note of vulnerability that he hadn't heard before. "Mr. Wellington, I became a doctor because I believe everyone deserves to see the beauty in the world. Your case represents the culmination of everything I've worked toward in my career. The chance to give sight to someone who has accomplished so much without it, that's not just a medical procedure, it's a miracle. And I don't get many opportunities to perform miracles." After she left, Marcus sat alone in his office for a long time, listening to the city sounds drifting up from the street below. Elena Vasquez had offered him something he wanted desperately, but his instincts were sending mixed signals. Everything she had said made sense, her credentials were impressive, and her confidence seemed genuine, yet something felt too convenient, too perfectly aligned with his desires. He pressed the intercom button. "Sarah, I need you to run a comprehensive background check on Dr. Elena Vasquez. I want to know everything: her education, her professional history, her financial situation, her personal life. Everything. Of course, Mr. B. Wellington." "Should I use our usual investigation service?" "Yes, but I also want you to hire a second firm independently. I want 2 complete reports, and I don't want either firm to know about the other." "Understood. Anything specific you're looking for?" Marcus considered the question. What was he looking for? Evidence of fraud? Signs of financial desperation that might drive someone to attempt a dangerous procedure for money? Or was he simply being paranoid because the offer seemed too good to be true? "I want to know if she's legitimate," he said finally, "and I want to know if she's desperate." That evening, Marcus stood on the balcony of his penthouse, 30 floors above the city he had once loved to look at. The sounds of traffic and human activity drifted up from below, creating a symphony that had become his substitute for the visual beauty he remembered. He thought about Elena Vasquez and her promise to restore his sight, weighing his desire for vision against his hard-earned caution about people's motives. The investigation would take several days to complete, giving him time to research the procedure she had described and consult with other specialists about its feasibility. But even as he planned his careful, methodical approach to evaluating her offer, Marcus found himself thinking about Elena herself. The way her voice had softened when she spoke about performing miracles, the confidence in her handshake, the subtle way her perfume had lingered in his office after she left. He had built his fortune by trusting his instincts about people and opportunities. His blindness had only sharpened those instincts, making him more sensitive to the subtle cues that revealed people's true intentions. With Elena, though, he was getting conflicting signals. His business sense warned him to be cautious, but something deeper was urging him to trust her. As he stood there in the darkness that had become his constant companion, Marcus Wellington had no idea that his decision about Elena Vasquez would ultimately test everything he thought he knew about trust, love, and the true nature of blindness. The woman who promised to give him sight was about to show him things he had never wanted to see, and the price of vision would be far higher than any amount of money. The game had already begun, and Marcus didn't even know he was a player. The investigation reports arrived on Marcus's desk exactly 1 week after his meeting with Dr. Elena Vasquez. Both firms had been thorough, and their findings painted a picture that was both reassuring and puzzling. Elena Vasquez was indeed a brilliant surgeon with impeccable credentials. She had graduated summa cum laude from Harvard Medical School, completed her residency at Johns Hopkins, and spent 2 years studying advanced ophthalmic techniques in Switzerland. Her research publications were legitimate and groundbreaking, and her professional reputation was spotless. What troubled Marcus, however, were the gaps in her personal life and the inconsistencies in her financial history. Both investigation firms had noted that Elena seemed to have appeared in the United States medical community about 5 years ago with no clear background before that point. Her educational records were verified and legitimate, but they were also remarkably clean. No gaps, no failures, no struggles that most people experience during their academic journey. More concerning was her financial situation. Despite her impressive credentials and successful practice, Elena appeared to be living well beyond what her income should support. She owned her expensive apartment on the Upper East Side, drove a luxury car, and traveled frequently to medical conferences around the world. Yet her practice, while successful, wasn't generating the kind of revenue that would support such a lifestyle. Marcus was mulling over these inconsistencies when Sarah announced that Dr. Vasquez had arrived for their follow-up appointment. This time, Marcus had prepared more carefully. He had consulted with 3 other specialists about the procedure Elena had described, and their responses had been mixed. One had called it promising, but highly experimental. Another had been more skeptical, suggesting that the success rate Elena had quoted was overly optimistic. The third had admitted he wasn't familiar with the specific techniques she had mentioned, but said they sounded theoretically possible. "Dr. Vasquez," Marcus said as she entered his office, "I appreciate you coming back to continue our discussion. Of course, I hope you've had time to consider the treatment options we discussed." Marcus noticed immediately that something was different about Elena today. Her voice carried a slight tension that hadn't been there during their first meeting, and her movements seemed more controlled, less naturally confident. His heightened senses picked up subtle signs of stress, a barely perceptible increase in her breathing rate, the faint sound of her jewelry jingling as her hands trembled slightly, and an almost imperceptible change in her scent that suggested nervousness. "I have been researching the procedure extensively," Marcus said carefully. "I consulted with several other specialists to get their opinions on the techniques you described." Elena's breathing pattern changed slightly, not enough for most people to notice, but Marcus caught the brief moment when she held her breath before responding. "That's very wise of you. What did they tell you?" Their opinions were mixed. Some were intrigued by the approach, others were more cautious about the experimental nature of the treatment. One concern that came up repeatedly was the limited number of successful cases using these techniques. "As I mentioned before, this is a cutting-edge procedure," Elena replied, her voice regaining some of its earlier confidence. "Most traditional specialists are naturally conservative about new approaches. They prefer to wait for extensive clinical trials before embracing innovative treatments. But in your case, waiting could mean missing the optimal window for intervention." Marcus leaned back in his chair, considering his next move carefully. He had decided to test Elena's reactions by sharing some of what the investigations had revealed, but he wanted to do so in a way that wouldn't immediately alert her to the extent of his knowledge. "Vasquez, may I ask where you developed expertise in these particular techniques? I understand they're quite specialized, and I'm curious about your background in this specific area." For the first time since he had met her, Elena hesitated for more than a moment before responding. Marcus heard her shift in her chair, and when she spoke, her voice had a carefully controlled quality that suggested she was choosing her words very deliberately. "I spent 2 years in Switzerland working with Dr. Heinrich Müller, who is considered the leading researcher in bioengineered optic reconstruction. Much of my expertise comes from that collaboration, though I've continued to develop and refine the techniques since returning to the United States." Marcus made a mental note to have his investigators verify this claim about Dr. Müller. "That's impressive. I imagine that kind of specialized training is quite expensive." "It was a significant investment, yes, but the knowledge and techniques I gained have made it possible for me to offer treatments that no one else in this country can provide." The conversation continued for another 30 minutes, with Elena providing more details about the proposed procedure and addressing Marcus's technical questions with apparent expertise. Yet throughout their discussion, Marcus continued to sense an underlying tension that hadn't been present during their first meeting. It was as if Elena was performing a carefully rehearsed role rather than speaking from genuine enthusiasm and knowledge. As their meeting concluded, Elena made a suggestion that surprised Marcus. "Wellington, I wonder if you might be interested in joining me for dinner tomorrow evening. I realize this is somewhat unconventional, but I find that patients often feel more comfortable making important medical decisions when they have a chance to know their doctor as a person rather than just a professional." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. The invitation was unexpected and crossed the line from professional to personal in a way that both intrigued and concerned him. Elena Vasquez was an attractive woman. He could tell that from her voice, her presence, and the subtle cues his other senses provided. But mixing business with pleasure, especially when millions of dollars in his eyesight were at stake, seemed unwise. On the other hand, dinner would give him an opportunity to learn more about Elena in a less formal setting. If she was hiding something, she might be more likely to reveal it during casual conversation than in his office. "I'd be delighted to have dinner with you," Marcus said. "Do you have a restaurant preference?" "Actually, I was thinking of something more private. I have a lovely apartment with a view of the park, and I enjoy cooking. If you're comfortable with it, I'd like to prepare dinner for you. It would give us a chance to talk more freely about your treatment options without the formal atmosphere of an office consultation." Every instinct Marcus had developed since losing his sight was screaming warnings at him. Accepting a dinner invitation at Elena's apartment was exactly the kind of situation his security team would advise against. It isolated him in an unfamiliar environment with someone he barely knew, someone who stood to gain significantly from his medical decision. Yet he found himself saying, "That sounds wonderful. What time would work for you?" They agreed on 7 o'clock the following evening, and Elena provided her address. After she left, Marcus sat alone in his office feeling like he had just made either a very smart move or a very dangerous mistake. He called his head of security, James Morrison, a former police detective who had been managing Marcus's personal safety since the accident. "James, I need you to do something for me tomorrow evening." "Of course, sir. What do you need?" "I'm having dinner at Dr. Elena Vasquez's apartment. I want you to position yourself somewhere nearby where you can monitor the building. If I don't call you by 10 o'clock tomorrow night, I want you to come looking for me. Sir, if you're concerned about your safety, perhaps you should reconsider this dinner." Marcus understood James's concern, but he had made his decision. "I need to learn more about Dr. Vasquez, and sometimes the only way to truly understand someone is to put yourself in a vulnerable position with them. Their reaction tells you everything you need to know about their character." The next evening, Marcus arrived at Elena's apartment building at exactly 7 o'clock. The doorman announced his arrival, and Marcus took the elevator to the 15th floor. Elena's apartment was impressive. He could tell from the acoustics that it had high ceilings and large open spaces.
The sense of cooking filled the air, something that smelled like herbs and wine and roasted vegetables.
"Marcus," Elena said as she opened the door, "I'm so glad you could come." She had changed from her professional attire into something more casual, and Marcus could sense a different energy from her, more relaxed, more genuinely warm than she had seemed in his office.
As she led him into her living room, Marcus used his enhanced senses to gather information about his surroundings. The apartment was elegantly furnished, with what felt like expensive furniture and artwork. The sounds from outside suggested they were indeed high above the park, as she had mentioned. Most interestingly, Marcus detected subtle scents that told him Elena lived alone. No traces of cologne or other personal scents that would suggest a regular male presence. No signs of children or pets. "Your apartment is beautiful," Marcus said, settling into what felt like a leather chair near large windows. "The acoustics suggest quite a bit of space." "Thank you. I fell in love with this place the moment I saw it. The view of Central Park is breathtaking, especially at sunset." Elena served wine and appetizers while they talked, and Marcus found himself genuinely enjoying her company. Away from the formal setting of his office, Elena seemed more natural, more genuinely engaged in their conversation. She asked thoughtful questions about his business, showed genuine interest in how he had adapted to blindness, and shared stories about her own challenges and successes as a surgeon. As the evening progressed, Marcus began to relax his guard. Elena was an excellent cook, an engaging conversationalist, and her attention seemed genuinely focused on him as a person rather than as a patient or a source of income. When she spoke about medicine, her passion for helping people seemed authentic. When she talked about her background, her stories felt genuine and unforced. It was during dessert that Elena shifted the conversation back to his treatment options. "Marcus, I hope you don't mind me bringing this up, but I've been thinking about your case all week. The more I consider the specific nature of your injuries, the more confident I become that we can achieve remarkable results. What makes you so certain?" Elena moved closer to him on the couch where they had relocated for dessert and coffee. Marcus could feel her presence next to him, could smell her perfume more distinctly, could sense the warmth of her body. When she spoke, her voice carried an intimacy that made his heart race. "Because I've seen cases similar to yours, and I know what's possible when everything comes together perfectly." "Marcus, I want to be completely honest with you about something. Please do. This procedure isn't just professionally important to me. It's personal. You see, my younger brother lost his sight in an accident when he was 15. I watched what that did to him, how it changed not just his life, but our entire family's life. I became a doctor specifically to help people like you, like him, to give back something that should never have been taken away. The story was touching and seemed genuine, but something about it bothered Marcus. Elena's emotional tone felt authentic, but there was something too convenient about a backstory that perfectly explained her motivation and created an emotional connection between them. I'm sorry about your brother, Marcus said carefully. That must have been very difficult for your family. It was, but it also taught me that sight is about more than just seeing. It's about independence, about connection with the world, about fully experiencing everything life has to offer. Elena placed her hand on Marcus's arm, and he felt a jolt of attraction that surprised him with its intensity. It had been a long time since he had felt such a strong physical response to a woman, and the combination of Elena's apparent vulnerability, her professional expertise, and her obvious interest in him was intoxicating. Marcus, she said softly, I want to help you see again, not just as your doctor, but as someone who cares about you. The moment felt charged with possibility and danger. Marcus found himself leaning toward Elena, drawn by her warmth and the promise she represented. But even as his body responded to her proximity, his mind was analyzing the situation with the cold calculation that had made him successful in business. Elena Vasquez was offering him everything he wanted: his sight, professional expertise, and personal attention from a beautiful, intelligent woman. The combination was almost too perfect, too precisely calibrated to his desires and vulnerabilities. In his experience, when something seemed too good to be true, it usually was. Elena, he said, gently removing her hand from his arm, I'm very attracted to you, and I'm grateful for your interest in my case. But I think we need to keep our professional relationship separate from any personal feelings we might be developing. Elena pulled back slightly, and Marcus sensed disappointment in her posture and breathing. Of course, you're absolutely right. I apologize if I've been unprofessional. It's just that I feel such a strong connection to you, both as a doctor and as a person. I feel the connection too, Marcus admitted. But that's exactly why we need to be careful. I want to make the decision about the procedure based on medical facts, not on personal emotions. They spent the rest of the evening talking more generally, and Elena graciously accepted his position about keeping things professional. Yet Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he had just passed some kind of test, that Elena's apparent romantic interest had been as carefully planned as her medical presentation. As he prepared to leave, Elena walked him to the door. Marcus, I want you to know that regardless of what happens between us personally, my commitment to helping you regain your sight remains absolute. I believe in this procedure, and I believe in what we can accomplish together. I appreciate that, Elena. I should have a decision for you within the next few days. On the ride home, Marcus reflected on the evening's events. Elena Vasquez continued to be an enigma, a woman who seemed both genuine and calculating, professional and personal, trustworthy and suspicious. His attraction to her was undeniable, but his business instincts were still sending warning signals. When he arrived home, Marcus called James Morrison to report that he was safe. Then he placed another call to his investigation service with specific instructions to verify Elena's story about her brother and to dig deeper into her background before coming to the United States. He had a feeling that the real Elena Vasquez was still hiding beneath the surface of the woman he had met, and he needed to know who she really was before he entrusted her with his sight and his life. The second round of investigation reports arrived 3 days after Marcus's dinner with Elena, and they painted a disturbing picture that made his blood run cold. The story about Elena's brother was a lie. She was an only child, and there was no record of any family member losing their sight in an accident. More troubling, the investigators had discovered that Elena Vasquez had significant gambling debts and had recently borrowed heavily against her medical practice. Most alarming of all, they had found evidence of a previous malpractice lawsuit that had been quietly settled out of court. A wealthy businessman in Chicago had sued Elena for performing an experimental eye procedure that had left him completely blind in both eyes instead of improving his vision as promised. The settlement had been substantial enough to bankrupt most doctors, but Elena had managed to continue practicing by relocating to New York and rebuilding her reputation. Marcus sat in his office, his hands trembling slightly as Sarah finished reading the full report aloud. Elena Vasquez wasn't just desperate for money. She was a dangerous surgeon who had already destroyed one person's vision while attempting the same procedure she was now proposing for him. "Sir," Sarah said quietly, Should I cancel your appointment with Dr. Vasquez this afternoon? Marcus had been planning to give Elena his decision about the procedure today. Now he found himself facing a dilemma that went far beyond medical treatment. Elena was clearly a fraud, and possibly a dangerous one. But simply cancelling their appointment wouldn't resolve the situation. If she was willing to risk blinding a patient for money, she might be desperate enough to try other approaches to get what she wanted.
No, Marcus said finally.
But I want you to call James Morrison and have him position security personnel in the building. I'm going to confront Dr. Vasquez with what we've discovered, and I want to be prepared for any reaction. Sir, wouldn't it be safer to simply avoid her altogether? Marcus considered this option, but his business instincts told him that running away would only delay the problem. Eleanor knew he was wealthy, knew he was vulnerable due to his blindness, and had already invested significant time in cultivating their relationship. If he simply disappeared, she might escalate her approach in ways that could be even more dangerous. Sarah, Elena Vasquez has spent weeks studying my routines, my security arrangements, and my vulnerabilities. She knows where I live, where I work, and how I spend my time. Simply avoiding her won't make her disappear. It will just force her to become more creative in her approach.
That afternoon, Elena arrived at Marcus's office with an energy that seemed different from their previous meetings.
She appeared more confident, more relaxed, as if she believed she had successfully won his trust during their dinner together. Marcus, she said warmly, as she settled into the chair across from his desk. I've been looking forward to hearing your decision. I have to tell you, I've been thinking about our conversation the other night, and I'm more excited than ever about the possibilities for your treatment. Marcus had spent hours preparing for this confrontation, but actually facing Elena, while knowing what he now knew about her, was more difficult than he had expected. Her voice still carried that warm, caring tone that had initially attracted him. Her presence still generated the same magnetic pull that had made him want to trust her. It was disturbing to realize how effectively she had manipulated his emotions. Elena, Marcus said carefully, before we discuss the procedure, I need to ask you some questions about your background and experience. Of course. What would you like to know? Tell me about your brother who lost his sight in an accident. Elena didn't hesitate, which told Marcus that she had prepared for this question. What specifically would you like to know about him? What kind of accident was it? How old was he when it happened? How has he adapted to blindness? Elena launched into a detailed story about a car accident, her brother's struggles with depression and adjustment, and the family's efforts to help him rebuild his life. Her emotional tone seemed genuine. Her details were consistent with what she had told him before, and her delivery was smooth and convincing. If Marcus hadn't known she was lying, he would have found her story completely believable. The realization that Elena was such a skilled liar was both impressive and terrifying. That's a very touching story, Marcus said when she finished. It must have been difficult for your family. What's your brother's name? For the first time, Elena hesitated. It was a brief pause, but Marcus caught it clearly. His name is Carlos, she said. Carlos Vasquez. Marcus made a mental note to have his investigators check whether Elena had prepared any false documentation to support this fictional brother's existence. Her ability to construct such detailed lies on the spot suggested this wasn't her first attempt at this kind of deception. Elena, I need to share something with you, Marcus said, his voice taking on the cold, business-like tone he used when terminating employees or ending partnerships. I've had you investigated. The silence that followed was profound. Marcus could hear Elena's breathing pattern change, could sense her body tensing in the chair across from him. When she finally spoke, her voice was carefully controlled, but he could detect the underlying strain. That's quite thorough of you. What did you discover? I discovered that you don't have a brother named Carlos. I discovered that you've been living beyond your means and have significant gambling debts. Most importantly, I discovered that you've performed this same procedure before, and it left your patient completely blind. Elena said nothing for several long moments. Marcus could hear her shifting in her chair, could sense her mind racing as she calculated her options. When she finally spoke, her voice had changed completely. The warm, caring doctor was gone, replaced by someone harder and more calculating. Marcus, I can explain everything. I'm listening. Elena took a deep breath, and Marcus realized she was about to launch into another carefully constructed story. The case you're referring to in Chicago is very different from yours. That patient had underlying conditions that weren't apparent during the initial examination. His blindness was caused by complications that we couldn't have anticipated, not by any error in the procedure itself. And the gambling debts? I made some poor financial decisions, yes, but that doesn't affect my ability as a surgeon or my commitment to your case. Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying Elena's responses, not just for their content, but for what they revealed about her character. She wasn't denying his accusations or expressing outrage at being investigated. Instead, she was calmly providing alternative explanations, trying to reframe the evidence in ways that minimized its significance. Elena, you lied to me about your brother. You lied to me about your motivations for becoming a doctor. You've been living a lie about your financial situation and your professional history. Why should I believe anything you tell me now? Because, Elena said, her voice taking on a desperate edge that Marcus hadn't heard before, regardless of my personal problems, I genuinely can help you regain your sight. The procedure is sound, Marcus. The techniques are proven. What happened in Chicago was a rare complication, not a reflection of the treatment's effectiveness. Marcus felt a moment of doubt despite everything he had learned. Elena's professional confidence seemed genuine, and her technical knowledge had been impressive during their discussions. Was it possible that she was a skilled surgeon whose personal problems had led her to make poor decisions, but who could still deliver on her medical promises? Even if the procedure could work, Marcus said, how can I trust someone who has lied to me about everything else? Elena stood up from her chair and moved closer to his desk. Marcus could sense her leaning forward, could feel the intensity of her focus on him. When she spoke, her voice carried a raw honesty that was more compelling than any of her previous performances. Marcus, you're right to be angry. You're right not to trust me. I've lied to you, and I've made terrible mistakes in my personal life. But I'm not lying about this procedure. I know it can work because I've spent years perfecting these techniques. What happened in Chicago was heartbreaking, but I learned from that experience. I know how to avoid those complications now. Why should I risk my remaining health on the word of someone who has already proven herself to be dishonest? Elena was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was softer, more vulnerable than Marcus had ever heard it. Because I need this to work as much as you do. My career, my reputation, my entire future depends on successfully helping you regain your sight. I can't afford to fail again. The admission was surprisingly candid, and Marcus found himself almost respecting Elena's honesty about her desperation. At least she was no longer pretending that her motivations were purely altruistic. Elena, what you're describing isn't reassuring. It's terrifying. You're telling me that you're so desperate to succeed that you're willing to risk my health on an experimental procedure that has already failed once. No, Elena said urgently, moving even closer to his desk. I'm telling you that I'm so committed to your success that I won't let anything go wrong. Marcus, I know you think I'm just a desperate woman trying to take advantage of you, but that's not what this is about anymore. What is it about? Elena's voice dropped to almost a whisper. I've fallen in love with you. Marcus felt his heart skip a beat despite everything he knew about Elena's deceptive nature. The words seemed to carry genuine emotion, genuine vulnerability, and he found himself wanting to believe them, even though his rational mind knew better. Elena. I know how this sounds, she continued quickly. I know you have every reason not to believe me. But somewhere during our meetings, during our dinner together, I stopped thinking about you as a patient or a source of income and started caring about you as a person. I want to help you see again because I want you to be able to look into my eyes and know that my feelings for you are real. Marcus sat back, trying to process Elena's words and his own conflicted emotions. Everything he had learned about her suggested she was a manipulative liar who would say anything to get what she wanted. Yet something about her tone, her presence, her apparent vulnerability seemed genuine. Elena, even if your feelings are real, that doesn't change the fact that you've lied to me repeatedly and that you've failed at this procedure before. The lies were about my personal life, not about my medical expertise, and the failure in Chicago taught me things that will make your procedure successful. Marcus, I'm begging you to give me a chance to prove myself. Marcus realized that Elena Vasquez had put him in an impossible situation. He was attracted to her despite knowing she was dangerous. He wanted to believe her claims about the procedure despite evidence that she had failed before. Most confusingly, part of him wanted to believe that her feelings for him were genuine despite knowing how skillfully she had manipulated him from their first meeting.
Elena, I need time to think about everything you've told me today.
But Marcus, please don't let my personal mistakes blind you to the possibilities we could achieve together. I know I've given you reasons not to trust me, but I'm asking you to trust the science, trust the procedure, Trust what we could accomplish.
After Elena left, Marcus sat alone in his office, feeling more conflicted than he had since losing his sight. Elena Vasquez was clearly dangerous, a liar, a desperate gambler, and a surgeon who had already blinded one patient.
Logic dictated that he should have nothing more to do with her. Yet something about their interaction had left him wondering if there might be truth hidden within her lies. Her technical knowledge seemed genuine, her passion for helping him appeared real, and her claim to have feelings for him had carried an emotional weight that was difficult to fake. Marcus called James Morrison and instructed him to increase security around both his home and office. Then he placed a call to his investigation service with instructions to dig even deeper into Elena's background, particularly focusing on the details of the Chicago case and any other patients she might have treated with experimental procedures. He had a feeling that his next decision about Elena Vasquez would be the most important choice he had made since losing his sight. The question was whether he was wise enough to see through her deceptions, or whether his desire for vision would blind him to dangers that could cost him far more than his sight. The third investigation report arrived 5 days later, and it contained information that changed everything Marcus thought he knew about Elena Vasquez. The Chicago patient hadn't just lost his vision, he had died 3 weeks after the failed procedure from complications that Elena had allegedly tried to cover up. The malpractice settlement had included a substantial payment to the victim's family, along with a non-disclosure agreement that had kept the death out of public records. More disturbing still, Elena wasn't just in debt to casinos. She owed money to people who had connections to organized crime, the kind of people who didn't accept late payments or bankruptcy as excuses. According to the investigators' contacts in Chicago, Elena had approximately 6 weeks to pay back nearly $2 million, or she would face consequences that went far beyond financial ruin. Marcus realized with growing alarm that Elena Vasquez wasn't just desperate for money, she was desperate for her life. That made her infinitely more dangerous than he had initially understood. A doctor facing bankruptcy might cut corners or exaggerate success rates, but a doctor facing death would be willing to do anything to survive. The final piece of information in the report was the most chilling. Elena had recently purchased a substantial life insurance policy on herself, with Marcus Wellington listed as the beneficiary. She had done this without his knowledge or consent, using public information to complete the application. The policy was worth $10 million and would pay out immediately upon her death from any cause. Marcus sat in his office, his hands clenched into fists, as the full scope of Elena's plan became clear. She wasn't just planning to take his money for a procedure that might blind him. She was planning to fake her own death and disappear with both the insurance payout and whatever money she could extract from him beforehand. The insurance policy explained why she had been so careful to establish an emotional connection with him. She needed him to appear to be a legitimate beneficiary rather than a random stranger. "Sarah," Marcus said through the intercom, "get James Morrison on the phone immediately. Then cancel all my appointments for the rest of the day." James arrived within 20 minutes, and Marcus filled him in on everything the investigation had revealed. His head of security listened without interruption, but Marcus could hear the growing concern in his breathing and the subtle sounds of James taking notes.
Mr.
"Wellington," James said when Marcus finished, "this woman is extremely dangerous. We need to contact the police immediately and have her arrested for insurance fraud, at minimum." "On what evidence?" Marcus asked. "She hasn't actually done anything illegal yet. Taking out a life insurance policy, even listing someone as beneficiary without their knowledge, isn't technically a crime if she pays the premiums herself. We have no proof that she's planning to fake her death or that she intends to harm me. But we have proof that she lied about her background and that she caused a patient's death in Chicago." Marcus had considered this option, but he realized it wouldn't solve his fundamental problem. "James, even if we could get Elena arrested, that would only delay whatever plan she has in motion. Her debts are real, her creditors are real, and her deadline is real. If we remove her from the equation without addressing those factors, someone else might decide that I'm still a valuable target." "What are you suggesting?" Marcus had been thinking about this problem from every angle, and he had reached a conclusion that was both risky and potentially brilliant. "I think we need to let Elena believe her plan is working while we gather evidence of her actual crimes and neutralize the people she owes money to." James was quiet for a long moment. "Sir, that would require you to continue meeting with her, possibly even agreeing to the procedure. The risk to your personal safety would be enormous." "The risk is already enormous," Marcus pointed out. "Elena Vasquez knows everything about my routines, my security, and my vulnerabilities. She's had weeks to study me and plan her approach. Simply hiding from her won't make her disappear. It will just force her to become more creative and more desperate." Marcus had learned from years in business that the best way to deal with a dangerous opponent was to appear to give them what they wanted, while actually controlling the situation from behind the scenes. If Elena thought she was successfully manipulating him, she might become overconfident and make mistakes that would expose her true intentions. James, I want you to contact the authorities in Chicago and see if we can reopen the investigation into that patient's death. I also want you to reach out to federal authorities about the insurance fraud angle. Most importantly, I want you to identify Elena's creditors and see if there's a way to resolve her debt situation.
You're thinking of paying off her debts?
I'm thinking of buying them, Marcus corrected. If we can purchase Elena's debts from her current creditors, we can control the timeline and the pressure she's under. That might give us the leverage we need to expose her plan without putting anyone else at risk. James left to begin implementing Marcus's strategy, and Marcus placed a call to Elena's office. When she answered, her voice carried the same warm, professional tone that had initially attracted him, but now it sounded calculated and false to his enhanced senses. Elena, I've made my decision about the procedure. Oh, Marcus, I'm so glad you called. What have you decided? I want to move forward with the treatment. When can we begin? The silence that followed lasted just a moment too long, and Marcus could practically hear Elena's mind racing as she processed this unexpected development. She had probably expected him to decline the procedure after their confrontational meeting several days earlier. That's wonderful news, Marcus. I'm so pleased that you're willing to trust me with your care. I've realized that my personal feelings about your background shouldn't interfere with what might be my best chance to regain my sight, Marcus said, using the same calm, businesslike tone he employed in important negotiations. If you're confident that the procedure will work, then I'm willing to take the risk. I am absolutely confident, Elena replied, and Marcus could hear genuine excitement in her voice now. When would you like to schedule the first surgery? As soon as possible. I've been blind for 3 years, and I don't want to wait any longer than necessary. They spent the next 20 minutes discussing scheduling and logistics, with Elena explaining that she would need to reserve operating room time at a private surgical facility and coordinate with her team of specialists. Marcus agreed to everything she suggested, while mentally noting each detail that might be useful for the authorities when they eventually moved against her. As their conversation concluded, Elena made one more personal appeal. Marcus, I want you to know how much this means to me. Not just professionally, but personally. I meant what I said about my feelings for you. I believe you did, Marcus replied, which was technically true. He believed Elena had convinced herself that her feelings were real, even though they were ultimately motivated by her desperate need for money and survival. Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus played his role perfectly. He attended preoperative consultations, underwent medical tests, and transferred a substantial down payment for the procedure to Elena's medical practice. Throughout this process, James Morrison's investigation continued in the background, gathering evidence and building relationships with law enforcement agencies in multiple jurisdictions. The break they needed came when James's contacts in Chicago agreed to reopen the investigation into the patient's death. The original coroner's report had noted irregularities that suggested the death might not have been from natural complications, but the case had been closed due to political pressure and Elena's financial settlement with the victim's family. More importantly, James had successfully traced Elena's gambling debts to a criminal organization with operations in several major cities. Through intermediaries, he had approached these creditors with an offer to purchase Elena's debts at a substantial discount. The criminals were happy to accept immediate payment rather than continue pursuing a debtor who might never be able to pay, especially when the buyer was a legitimate businessman with no connection to their other operations. 3 days before Marcus's scheduled surgery, Elena invited him to her apartment for what she described as a final consultation. This time, Marcus was prepared not just with security backup, but with recording equipment that would capture whatever Elena planned to reveal during their meeting. When he arrived at Elena's apartment, Marcus immediately noticed that something was different. Elena's normal composed demeanor had been replaced by nervous energy that she was trying unsuccessfully to hide. Her voice carried tension, her movements were more abrupt, and her attempts at casual conversation felt forced and unnatural. Marcus, she said as they sat down with wine in her living room, I need to discuss something important with you about tomorrow's procedure. Of course, what do you need to tell me? Elena took a large swallow of wine before continuing, and Marcus realized she was using alcohol to calm her nerves for whatever she was about to say. The surgical facility we'll be using is a bit unconventional.
It's a private clinic that specializes in experimental procedures, so it doesn't have all the same oversight and documentation requirements as a traditional hospital.
Marcus felt his pulse quicken, but he kept his voice calm and curious. What does that mean exactly?
It means we can work more freely, with less bureaucratic interference.
We can focus entirely on your treatment without having to worry about insurance companies or medical review boards questioning our techniques.
The explanation sounded reasonable on the surface, but Marcus understood what Elena was really telling him.
She was planning to perform the procedure in a facility where there would be minimal oversight, limited records, and few witnesses. If something went wrong, either accidentally or deliberately, it would be much easier to cover up.
That sounds efficient, Marcus said. Will your usual medical team be assisting with the surgery? Actually, I'll be working with a smaller team for this procedure. Just myself and 2 other specialists who are experts in these particular techniques. Marcus made mental notes of every detail Elena provided, knowing that James would need this information to coordinate with law enforcement. Elena was essentially admitting that she was planning to isolate Marcus in a private facility with minimal staff and oversight. As the evening progressed, Elena became increasingly emotional and physical in her interactions with Marcus.
She sat closer to him on the couch, touched his arm frequently while talking, and spoke more intimately about their relationship and her feelings for him.
Marcus,
She said softly.
I want you to know that whatever happens tomorrow, these past few weeks with you have been the most meaningful of my life.
The statement sent chills down Marcus's spine because it sounded distinctly like a goodbye. Elena was talking as if she didn't expect to see him again after the surgery, which aligned perfectly with her plan to fake her death and disappear with the insurance money.
Elena, you're talking as if something might go wrong tomorrow. Are you concerned about the procedure? No, she said quickly.
It's just that this surgery will change everything for both of us. Once you can see again, our relationship will be different.
You'll be able to look at me, really see me, and I'm not sure I'm ready for that level of scrutiny.
Marcus found Elena's emotional manipulation both skillful and disturbing.
Even knowing what he knew about her true intentions, part of him was responding to her apparent vulnerability and her claims about caring for him. Elena, I think I'll find you even more beautiful when I can see you with my eyes, instead of just with my other senses.
Elena leaned forward and kissed him, and Marcus found himself responding despite everything his rational mind was telling him. Elena Vasquez was dangerous, deceptive, and planning to betray him in the worst possible way, yet her physical presence and emotional intensity still affected him profoundly. When they separated, Elena rested her forehead against his and whispered, "I love you, Marcus. I want you to remember that, no matter what happens."
Marcus spent the rest of the evening playing his role as the trusting patient and potential romantic partner, while mentally preparing for what he knew would be the most dangerous day of his life.
Elena's plan was becoming clearer with each conversation, and tomorrow would determine whether his counter-strategy was sufficient to protect him and expose her crimes. As he prepared to leave, Elena walked him to the door and held him tightly.
"Marcus, I'll see you at the surgical center tomorrow morning. Are you ready to see the world again?"
"I've never been more ready for anything in my life," Marcus replied, which was absolutely true, though not in the way Elena interpreted it. He was ready to see Elena Vasquez's true face, ready to expose her dangerous plan, and ready to ensure that she never had the opportunity to hurt another person the way she had hurt him and her previous victims.
Marcus arrived at the private surgical facility at exactly 8 o'clock the next morning, accompanied by James Morrison and a team of federal agents who were positioned throughout the building disguised as medical personnel and maintenance workers.
The facility was exactly what Marcus had expected based on Elena's description. A small, private clinic with minimal staff and virtually no oversight or documentation protocols. Elena met him in the reception area, dressed in surgical scrubs and projecting an air of professional confidence that almost masked the nervous energy Marcus could sense beneath the surface.
She guided him to a preoperative room, where she began what appeared to be standard surgical preparation procedures.
Marcus, she said as she checked his vital signs, I want you to know that everything is going to go perfectly today.
I've reviewed every aspect of the procedure multiple times, and I'm completely confident in our success.
I trust you completely, Marcus replied, while the recording device hidden in his clothing captured every word of their conversation. What Elena didn't know was that Marcus wasn't actually going to undergo any surgery that day. The federal agents had coordinated with a legitimate ophthalmologist to examine the surgical setup Elena had prepared, and what they had discovered confirmed Marcus's worst fears about her intentions.
The equipment Elena had assembled wasn't designed for the complex procedure she had described to Marcus. Instead, it was configured for a much simpler operation that would have resulted in permanent blindness and quite possibly death from surgical complications. Elena wasn't planning to restore Marcus's sight. She was planning to ensure he never saw anything again. The evidence was overwhelming and damning. Elena had prepared surgical instruments that were inappropriate for optic reconstruction, had mixed anesthetic drugs in combinations that could cause fatal heart rhythm problems, and had arranged for a post-operative care protocol that would have made it impossible to reverse any surgical damage. As Elena continued her preoperative routine, Marcus listened carefully for any sign that she suspected their plan had been discovered. Her voice remained professionally calm, but his enhanced senses detected subtle signs of stress, slightly elevated breathing, the faint sound of perspiration despite the cool temperature in the room, and a barely perceptible tremor in her hands when she touched his arm. "Elena," Marcus said as she prepared to insert an IV line, "before we begin, I need to tell you something important."
What is it, Marcus? I know about Chicago. I know about the patient who died.
"I know about your gambling debts and the people you owe money to. Most importantly, I know about the insurance policy you took out with me as the beneficiary." Belle Elena's hands stopped moving, and the silence in the room became absolute. Marcus could hear her breathing change to quick, shallow gasps, could sense her body tensing as she processed the implications of what he had just said. "Marcus, I don't know what you think you've discovered, but I know you're not planning to restore my sight," Marcus interrupted. "I know you're planning to blind me permanently and then fake your own death to collect the insurance money. The question is whether you're going to surrender now or whether we need to do this the hard way." Elena stepped back from the examination table, and Marcus heard her moving toward what he assumed was the door. Instead of trying to leave, however, she seemed to be reaching for something. "Elena, there are federal agents positioned throughout this building. Whatever you're thinking of doing, it won't help your situation." "You have no idea what my situation is," Elena said, her voice now carrying a cold fury that was completely different from any tone Marcus had heard from her before. "You have no idea what those people will do to me if I don't pay them back. You have no idea what I've had to endure, what I've had to sacrifice, just to survive. I know you killed a patient in Chicago. I know you've been planning to kill me too." Elena laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Kill you? Marcus, you arrogant fool. I never planned to kill you. I planned to blind you and then disappear, leaving you alive to deal with the consequences. Death would have been too kind for someone like you." Marcus felt a chill, as he realized Elena's true plan had been even more twisted than he had understood. She hadn't just wanted his money, she had wanted him to suffer, to live with the knowledge that his trust and attraction to her had cost him his remaining vision. "Why?" Marcus asked. "What did I ever do to you?" "You represent everything I've never been able to have," Elena replied, her voice filled with bitter resentment. "You lost your sight and still managed to build an empire. You became wealthy and powerful while I struggled just to survive. You had every advantage in the world handed to you, while I had to fight for every opportunity." Marcus realized that Elena's entire relationship with him had been built on envy and resentment, rather than attraction or greed. She had wanted to destroy him not just for money, but for the symbolic satisfaction of bringing down someone who had succeeded where she had failed. "Elena, surrender now and we can help you deal with your creditors. This doesn't have to end with you in prison or worse." "Help me?" Elena's voice carried a note of hysteria now. "You think I believe anything you say after you've spent weeks lying to me, pretending to trust me while you investigated every aspect of my life?" Marcus heard Elena moving again, and this time the sound suggested she was preparing some kind of weapon. He tensed, ready to defend himself despite his blindness. But before Elena could act, the room filled with the sound of multiple people entering quickly. "Elena Vasquez, you're under arrest for insurance fraud, attempted murder, and conspiracy to commit murder," came the authoritative voice of Agent Sarah Chen, the federal investigator who had been coordinating the operation against Elena. Marcus heard sounds of a struggle, Elena's voice raised in angry protests, and the metallic click of handcuffs being applied. When the room became quiet again, Agent Chen approached Marcus. "Mr. Wellington, are you injured?" "I'm fine," Marcus replied, though his heart was still racing from the confrontation. "Did you get everything you needed?" "We got more than enough." Dr. Vasquez's surgical setup was designed to cause permanent damage, and the recording of her confession provides clear evidence of her criminal intent. Combined with the evidence from Chicago and the insurance fraud, she'll be facing significant federal charges. As Elena was led away, she turned back toward Marcus with a final comment that chilled him to the bone. "You think you've won, Marcus, but you'll never be able to trust anyone again. You'll spend the rest of your life wondering if every person who claims to care about you is just another Elena Vasquez looking for an opportunity." After Elena was taken into custody, Marcus spent several hours providing detailed statements to federal agents and coordinating with prosecutors about the case against her. The evidence was overwhelming, and Elena's confession had been clearly recorded, so her conviction seemed virtually certain. More importantly, James Morrison's strategy of purchasing Elena's gambling debts had successfully neutralized the criminal organization that had been pressuring her. With their money recovered, they had no further interest in Elena's fate or in Marcus's involvement in the situation. 3 weeks later, Marcus received a call from Agent Chen with an update on Elena's case. She had agreed to plead guilty to all charges in exchange for a reduced sentence that would keep her in federal prison for the next 15 years. She had also provided information about other potential victims she had been considering for similar schemes. The Chicago case had been reopened based on Elena's confession and additional evidence uncovered during the federal investigation. Elena would face additional charges related to that patient's death once she completed her federal sentence. Most surprisingly, Elena had requested to speak with Marcus one final time before being transferred to federal prison. Agent Chen strongly advised against the meeting, but Marcus found himself curious about what Elena might want to say. They met in a secure conference room at the federal courthouse, with Elena wearing an orange jumpsuit and restraints. The confident, attractive doctor who had first entered Marcus's office was gone, replaced by someone who looked exhausted and defeated. "Marcus," Elena said quietly, "I wanted to apologize for what I tried to do to you." "Do you really mean that, or is this another manipulation?"
Elena was quiet for a long moment before answering.
"Both, probably. I spent so many years lying and manipulating that I'm not sure I know the difference between genuine emotion and calculated performance anymore." Marcus found Elena's honesty more disturbing than her lies had been. At least when she was lying, he could dismiss her completely. Her admission that she no longer knew her own true feelings made her seem more human and somehow more tragic. "Elena, why did you really target me?" "Was it just the money and the insurance policy?" "At first, yes. But somewhere during our meetings, I started to genuinely care about you. That made everything worse, because I knew what I was planning to do to you, but I couldn't stop myself. I needed that money too desperately to walk away." Marcus realized that Elena's feelings for him had probably been genuine, which made her betrayal even more disturbing. She had cared about him and still been willing to destroy his life for money. "What happens now?" Marcus asked. "Now I serve my sentence and try to figure out who I really am underneath all the lies and desperation. Maybe prison will give me enough time to remember what I was like before I became the person who could plan to hurt someone I cared about." As Marcus prepared to leave, Elena made one final request. "Marcus, when you do find someone to trust again, and I hope you do, don't let my betrayal make you close yourself off completely. What I did to you was about my own brokenness, not about any flaw in your ability to judge people." Marcus left the courthouse feeling conflicted about Elena's final words. She had tried to destroy him in the cruelest way possible, yet her last act had been an attempt to prevent her betrayal from poisoning his future relationships. 6 months later, Marcus received an unexpected phone call from Dr. Richard Steinberg, a legitimate ophthalmologist at Johns Hopkins, who had been following his case through the medical community. Dr. Steinberg had been researching the same experimental techniques that Elena had claimed to use, and he had achieved some genuine success with patients whose conditions were similar to Marcus's. "Mr. Wellington," Dr. Steinberg said, "I know you've had a traumatic experience with experimental eye surgery, but I believe there may be legitimate treatment options available that could help restore some of your vision." Marcus found himself interested despite his experience with Elena. "Dr. Steinberg, how can I verify that your procedures are legitimate and that your motivations are genuine? I understand your caution completely. I'd like to invite you to visit our facility, meet our entire medical team, review our documentation and success rates, and speak with previous patients who have undergone similar treatments. I want you to be completely confident in our legitimacy before making any decisions." Marcus agreed to investigate Dr. Mack, Steinberg's offer. But this time he approached the situation with hard-earned wisdom about the difference between hope and desperation, between reasonable risk and dangerous manipulation.
The experience with Elena Vasquez had taught him that his blindness didn't make him vulnerable. His desire to see again did.
but it had also taught him that careful investigation, trusted advisors, and healthy skepticism could protect him from people who would exploit his hopes for their own gain. Most importantly, Elena's betrayal had shown him that he was strong enough to survive even the most sophisticated manipulation and cruel deception. He had trusted the wrong person with devastating consequences, but he had also been smart enough to protect himself when it mattered most. As Marcus considered Dr. Bride, Steinberg's offer and thought about the possibility of genuine treatment, he realized that Elena's final prediction had been wrong. Her betrayal hadn't made him unable to trust anyone again. Instead, it had taught him how to trust wisely, how to verify what people told him, and how to protect himself while still remaining open to legitimate opportunities. Elena Vasquez had promised to give him sight, but what she had actually given him was something far more valuable: the ability to see people's true intentions clearly, even in the darkness that had become his constant companion. In trying to blind him permanently, she had taught him to see better than he ever had before,